In today's video, I'm just going to be giving a updated meta-analysis video. You guys seem to really like the last one, and I left out HAGRID last time because when I was making the putting the clips together in the software I use for video editing, I just missed the HAGRID clip. So not much to say there, just kind of a flub on my part. So I'm going to start with HAGRID this time. So HAGRID has been really taken over lately. Almost never see an opponent that doesn't have HAGRID as an option. If you don't know, once you're in global duels, you have 3 deck options, and you ban one from your opponent, and you pick from the remaining 2. And HAGRID's almost always an option. And the reason for this is the locomotor statues, or whatever the payoff card that HAGRID is using, really difficult to kill. He increases the healing and the movement speed of the highest summon in your deck. If there's a tie like there is in this deck, it just randomly goes to one of them. And so usually it's Antipodian Opali, or it's the Loco statues, or it is Fiendfire. Fiendfire is super obnoxious. I kept going back and forth with a player in top ladder yesterday where I would win one, he would win one, I would win one, he would win one with Fiendfire. Sometimes it's Norwegian Ridgeback. And the common theme you'll see is obviously the big summon. That's the payoff card. And then you'll generally see Swelling Solution and Bombs. And the reason for that is if you're not running Swelling Solution and Bombs and you verse another HAGRID that is, they're going to out DPS you and they're just going to win. So you pretty much have to run the Swelling Solution and the Bombastic Bombs along with whatever the win con is. Now, some versions will run the Antipodian Opali and the Norwegian Ridgeback, and then they'll run like a Pipsky or maybe Essence of Dittany, something like that, to heal their guys up and get even more longevity out of the unit. This version that I run, I just change between the Antipodian Opali and the Loco statues depending on what I perceive my opponent to have a harder problem with. So for example, if I realize that they don't have a great answer to air units, for example, I'll just keep cycling back to Antipodian Opali and it'll do a lot of work for me. And that's another reason why Niffler's in here. And the curve is relatively low, especially because one of the 6 costs you're not really going to play. Because you're just spamming the one that they have problems with. The Atmosphere Charm is to kill opposing Cassandras, which can be very problematic, and that's another reason why I like running the Antipodian Opali, because Antipodian Opali's attack range is outside of Cassandra's, so it's super important. Now, the companions is where it gets interesting, and you can really almost do whatever you want. I was running Ron, McGonagall, and Ivy at some point just to make sure I have that board control, especially in the mirror matches. I've been testing out Lottie, and Lottie does really well. If you start off the game with like a Niffler Lottie and they can't answer the Lottie, then you can really just start snowballing and making it very hard for the opponent to come back. Something that you could do is swap out like the Incendio or the Atmosphere Charm for a Crucio, perhaps. And that would also stop an opposing Ron from charging onto your units and disrupting your first wave. But I've been doing well without it, and I'm winning most of my HAGRID mirror matches. I would say that HAGRID has a hard time against Bellatrix. Maybe not a hard time, but definitely like unfavored against Bellatrix because of all the Crucio naturally. I wouldn't be surprised if Weasley twins had a good matchup because they can just keep spamming Rons, keep spamming McGonagalls, keep spamming Ivies. Obviously, the opposing HAGRIDs, the mirror matches is going to be could be a potential issue. Outside of that, though, I think you have basically all the other matchups. You might get walled out by a Neville, but it generally doesn't happen. So HAGRID's just really strong right now because there's not a ton of counterplay. If your opponent's playing Bella and you're up high, you can just ban the Bella. And so, yeah, that's why HAGRID is so high up, and also why I had to take Snape out of my rotation, because if they ran Bella and HAGRID in their set of 3, I can't ban them both, which means I had to basically take Snape out of my rotation because I couldn't play him almost at all. I went like 2 days where I couldn't play the Snape on ladder. But that is essentially the breakdown on HAGRID. If you, let's say you have a NEWT, you can try and out damage it with your own bombastic bombs, but it's very difficult to do. And I think you need a suite of good companions, Crucio, your own Hagrid, Bella. Like I said, maybe Weasley twins. But yeah, he's definitely a force to be reckoned with at the moment. Fiendfire does seem to be really good, so maybe like particular variants of Hagrid are better than other variants, but this is the one that's been doing well for me. All right, next up on the list is Bella. If you'll notice, this is a lot of similarity to the Hagrid list, and that's not by mistake. It feels like it's almost necessary to have the swelling solution and the bombs if you run the locomotor, because you're just going to get out damaged if you don't. I'm keeping the cycle low, so that way against Hermione, for example, I can keep spamming the locomotors to absorb the damage. We have the book, so we can get into the nebulous, so we can keep applying pressure because we're trying to close the game first. If the opponent is running Orb of Water or Bombastic Bombs, then we just commit, but we don't overcommit to the board. So, for instance, if they have like Orb of Water, for example, I'll use like Monster Book and Madagat, and kind of spread out on the board instead of committing the statues. Same thing if they have Whizbang. If you see in a lot of these deck profiles that I have here, I have a lot of Broomstick, and that's because Whizbang is super popular at the moment because it's a banner, so everyone's getting their Whizbangs a lot higher. And we're in our second week of bans here, so Thunderstorm Orb of Water might be banned for a lot of you guys. So you're going to see a lot of Fiendfire, and so that's just kind of the tech choice at the moment. And that's one thing I really liked about this game. No matter what strategy you're using, there's pretty much like always at least like one or two flex spots in every single deck. And so right now I'm just playing Broomstick because, like I said, there's a lot of Whizbang. So with Bellatrix against Harry, against Hermione, against Hagrid, all these strategies, you're trying to just basically survive and build up to the double Death Eater and the 3 Death Eater, and you overwhelm your opponent in the late game. So McGonagall is Bellatrix is very strong in the late game, and that's also why I have this companion suite I do at the bottom where I have Ron, Ivy, and McGonagall. Ron first seems like a scrub thing to do, but it's actually not currently at the moment because a lot of people have Ivy as their second to counter Ron's being second. And so if I have it first, so if they have a Cassandra, a Lottie, a Kevin, Frey Twins, Gwarp, any of these like setup kind of things, or just basically not Ronin, then it does really well. And even if they do have Ron first, then it's just Ron on Ron, and it's fine, right? And then you have the Ivy second, so that way you can take away the opponent's Ron, take away their McGonagall, whatever the case may be. And then I have the McGonagall at the end, just to try and basically have a pseudo Ron again towards the end of the game. And again, same sort of thing with Hagrid. I am cycling really hard. As you can see, the cycle's 3.2, and it obviously gets better when you play Niffler. So you can just keep spamming the locomotors, and you end up getting a lot of value mid to late game with the Death Eaters. So I ban Bella the most. I think she's really scary. Has really good matchups against all summon decks. If you can get to the late game versus Newt, you're going to win. You win against Hagrid. You win against Snape late game. So yeah, she's definitely just a force to be reckoned with. Trying to think of really what her bad matchups are. I'm not really sure she has a particularly bad matchup. So yeah, Bella is just incredibly powerful. My favorite Echo at the moment. Very hard to deal with. Also, a lot of flex spots. I mean, you don't have to run Atmosphere Charm. You don't have to run Broomsticks. You don't have to run Swelling Solution. You don't have to really run a particular set of companions either. So she's just a very flexible, very dangerous Echo. And you're basically, it feels like whenever you play against her, you're just trying to get your strategy off and make, basically you have to kill her before the 3 Death Eaters come out, because that's when it just gets really crazy. So really hard to take down, and I just ban her constantly. Okay, next I wanted to talk about Hermione. And she's basically going to be the same archetype like she's always been. It's just that since bans are, have just been implemented again, I just wanted to point out that you don't have to run Thunderstorm or Orb of Water. You can simply run Whiz Bang, which is super obnoxious, also good in duos. And so we all know the combo, Incarcerus, send the Whiz Bang over, and yeah, it's just super obnoxious. You'll see a lot of Broomstick because there's just a lot of Whiz Bang going on right now. If you have problems with Locomotors, you'll have 2 cards in your deck that answer them very effectively. So Glacius is fantastic for removing the Locomotors. Whiz Bang will actually be good against HAGRID because it just does so much damage that you can kill them despite the HAGRID buff a lot of the time. So I think Hermione's a great choice right now. Always will be, probably. Just a very strong Echo. How I beat Hermione is I try and cycle to my big threats, or you go super wide on the board. You make sure you're not running into a Whiz Bang or Orb of Water or something like that. And basically apply more pressure to the Hermione than the Hermione's applying to you without overcommitting, and that's really important. In all my summon decks, I always have Monster Book in there so I can get inside of the Nebulous and just never take my foot off the gas. And I think that is super important. So yeah, it's just about the cycle and not overcommitting, because a lot of times they'll even run things like Confringo, so that way the Thunderstorm does more damage and it's not so spread out. They might run Venom, Incendio, stuff like that. So if you're playing a summon deck, you just have to be mindful of what your opponent's got in their hand. Make sure you're not overcommitting, but you do have to apply enough pressure before you just die to all the burn damage. And I find basically like the good control cards on the board, like perhaps Ivy, Ron, stuff like that. McGonagall's not that great against Hermione, but McGonagall's really good to use with Hermione. And Hermione's just got a huge boon because you can protect the McGonagall forever. You can hide it in Nebulous, and you can spam spells after spells after spells. So you can turn, you can transfigure summons into basically harmless things. And yeah, Hermione definitely got a huge buff after McGonagall, but I'm still winning doing the things that I described. But it's definitely a really strong deck. I have a lot of practice to do with it myself. I'm not the best Hermione player by any means. But yeah, don't feel discouraged if you have Thunderstorm or Orb of Water banned. You can very easily pivot to a Whiz Bang strategy. And it doesn't really matter what the bans are, because they can't ban Orb of Water, Whiz Bang, Thunderstorm, Protego Diabolica. They can't ban all the things that make Hermione good. So no matter what, you always have a meta deck to play for Hermione. Okay, next up on the list is Neville. Neville has taken... he has a much more of a fortress build than he did before, and I thought it was going to take the Harry companion card to make that happen, but that's not really the case. Unicorn has been almost entirely replaced. Obviously, there's still people that run Unicorn by the Acromantula Nest. The Acromantula Nest does very well against the Loco statues, and I think that's a big part of it. And it's also just a permanent that's just never going to die. It doesn't have to go into the opponent's half of the board in order to get its effectiveness through, so it can stay by Neville. You can keep protecting it, you can keep healing it, and it'll just keep spawning spiders, which is a really, really big issue. You can see I've got the Broomstick flex spot still. And then I also have Sidelong Apparition, because with Neville, they typically run a lot of stationary companions. So you'll have like Cassandra's, you'll have Kevin, you'll have, what's this guy's name again? Daniel. So you want to be able to move them out of the way. Same thing with the Dragon Egg, so you can Sidelong Apparition, teleport it with you away, and just kind of keep your fortress nice and nestled close. And then you've got the Protego Totalum, which makes the bubble, and it's just really, really hard to get through. You've got the Phoenix to give yourself a better cycle, and obviously constantly heal. And then Crucio is just a flex spot, so you can get rid of an opposing Ron, Antipode and Opali that might be big enough to get to your Cassandra. It's just a flex spot. Same thing with Broomstick, but the deck is now a lot more, not so much like Whomping Willow, Unicorn, Fire Crab. It's like put yourself in a corner and nothing ever dies, and you just spam Ridgeback and spiders, and it's really, really obnoxious, and it's hard to deal with. Bella's pretty good against him. I'm trying to think of how else I win. I usually beat this deck with Hagrid, but if you make like one misplay and they get like a mana advantage on you, it's so hard to take the Neville down. It gets really, really difficult. So you know, this is an instance where something like Whizbang can be really good, and maybe you need to make sure your opponent doesn't have Sidelong Apparition available. So it can be very tricky. And solo Neville is definitely evolving. Plucking out a Norwegian Ridgeback at the right time with an Ivy, for example, is really good. Playing a McGonagall and then Confringoing their board is really good. So there's counterplay, but if they set up that fortress, you're going to have a really hard time breaking it. Next up, we have Snape. So, Snape. You guys know I love Snape. The problem with Snape at the moment is there's too much Bella, there's too much Hagrid going around, and you can't get rid of both. Doesn't have a great matchup against Dobby Avada Kedavra either. So it's just something that has been squeezed out of my lineup, unfortunately. But it's a really great deck. Maybe if you're not in a format where you have bans, might have a lot of opportunity in duos still, because you'll basically never not have value with his passive. But again, this is basically a very low cycle 2.9, trying to get to locos, trying to spam copies of Snape, trying to set up a powerful Snape basic attack with the Kevins, which is super important. Atmosphere Charm to answer the Cassandra, because it's really hard to get in from a Cassandra in the back, and a lot of times you might have to Atmosphere Charm, then copy the Atmosphere Charm to answer it. And again, Broomstick is a flex spot. Swelling Solution's pretty much a flex spot. But other than that, I think this is really, really close to how everyone should play Snape. But yeah, you got to keep the cycle low, and you know, just get a lot of value out of your copies of yourself. And that low cycle will help you absorb damage from the Thunderstorm. But yeah, unfortunately, he is being squeezed out by all the Hagrid and the Bella at the moment. Okay, next up on the list is NEWT. So just like Hermione, McGonagall was a huge boon to NEWT, because you can save up a bunch of one-cost cards, so that way when McGonagall comes out, you have a really good chance of producing another Loco statue. You can transfigure a lot of opponent summons, and that's also one of the reasons why I have Confringo in this deck, because if you group everything together with Ron or McGonagall, you know, transfigures everything, the Confringo is almost definitely going to clear everything, or almost everything, and you can just make a huge counter push that way. Keeping the cycle pretty low. It says 4.0, but we're really just going to like oscillate between the Antipodian Opali and the Loco statues, depending on which one's harder for them. Antipodian Opali, again, gets around Cassandra, which is a very big problem. And then, so let's say they have like a Crucio for Antipodian Opali. Then what you're going to do is you're going to spam summon, try and get back to it, or get a bunch of T-Bow's Assaults to finish her off. And that's pretty much what you got to do. It's another reason why Ron is in the front again, because it can also help deal with the turn, first companion play being Cassandra. And then, you know, McGonagall is basically the same thing followed up. And then Ivy is more board control. So whenever I'm playing on the board, I usually have this suite of companions in usually this order, or McGonagall and Ivy might be swapped. And I really just try and dominate the board. If you're going up against maybe like a Hagrid or something, you're just going to try and out DPS them with the Bombastic Bombs. It's going to be very hard in the board control with the companions. Newt's fantastic. I think McGonagall, like I said, gave him a huge boost. Bad matchups would be Bellatrix late game, Snape, Hagrid. I'd say that's probably all the bad matchups. Okay, next up we have Harry. Harry is a very unique Echo. He's basically almost like the equivalent of like a burn deck in this game, where you just basically go for a lot of face damage, and you hope you close it first, right? And so we run the Phoenix, keeps Harry alive longer, makes it even easier to cycle through your spells, which means you can get the three-headed dog down even faster. Broomstick, Apugno, nebulous or like a suite you're going to see together in Harry and Hermione a lot. One of the things you want to do is whenever they do the stupefy, which is, knocks back, and then if it hits something else, it does damage to that too. So try and make sure if you're like a summon deck that you don't stand directly behind your summons, because that just gives them extra value, and I find that to be extremely useful. You're trying to apply pressure without overextending into like a Ron or a McGonagall, for instance. But this actually needs to be updated. I would probably just put McGonagall and Ivy in here as well. But you just have to out DPS the Harry, so having a low cycle in your deck is super important, like it generally is. And like I said, the stupefy thing, if you have extra movement cards, you can move around, make it harder for them. But basically, you're trying to make it to where they're spending their resources clearing your summons, so that way that damage isn't being directed at you, which is easier said than done. Harry is quite scary sometimes, but he's definitely beatable. I think he doesn't do well against Hagrid. I don't think it does well against Bella if you survive to mid-late to late game. I could even see a problem with Newt potentially, although a Pugno and a Pugno being copied really could clear out a lot of things. So yeah, Harry's really about making sure that your strategy is basically DPSing harder than Harry is, and just not walking into the things that Harry can do against you, and you should be okay. But don't underestimate him. Okay, next up is the Weasley twins. These guys are very hard to talk about because the whole style is just completely flexible, and this isn't even like a deck. These are just ideas I wanted to talk about. So if you were running like some companions that just, stayed on the board and stayed fixated, like if you wanted to spam Cassandra's or, I don't know, Lottie or something like that, Protego Diabolica could be a good idea. Some versions just run, a classic suite of like Bombastic Bombs, Book, Pixies, Metaget, all these things, and then they just spam like these control companions where they're gonna, control the board by having multiple Cassandras, keep summoning Ron, keep summoning McGonagall. If you're running stationary companions, or you're running, I don't know, Norwegian Ridgeback, just anything crazy, Sidelong Apparition might not be a bad idea. Niffler probably goes in most versions because you're just trying to cycle through your deck, get back to your options. Swelling Solution with whatever the payoff card is, could be the Loco statues. You could be running Confringo, Avada Kedavra, Confringo, Crucio, Incendio, Atmosphere Charm, Venom. Like, there's just basically a million different ways to build these guys, and that's why they're really scary. They're just going to continue to be more and more popular as people figure them out. But also, whenever, let's say you're trying to ban from your opponent's list, if they have Weasley twins, you don't know exactly what they're doing. With Bellatrix, you know that there's going to be Death Eaters. With Newt, they're going to summon spam you. With Harry, it's going to be low-cost spells. Same with Hermione. But the Weasley twins have this like vagueness to them that makes them scary, because you just don't know what your opponent's doing. So if your deck has trouble, like let's say you're playing Newt, I wouldn't recommend leaving the Weasley twins up, because these companions being spammed against Newt would be a serious problem. So I guess I would think if my deck had like a certain suite of companions that gave it a hard time, then I might ban it. But yeah, they're really flexible, so it's really, really hard to talk about these guys. And lastly, I wanted to talk about Dobby, who is slowly gaining more traction as the game ages and matures, which is exactly what you would expect to happen. Spamming Avada Kedavra to win the game. It's my least favorite card in the game because it feels like the cheesiest strategy, but I understand that it's high skill. And, it's just never going to go anywhere, kind of like, Hermione Thunderstorm and stuff. It's just a ever-present archetype in the game. So they're going to use cards like Nebulous to hide, protect themselves from swarms. You don't really know where they're at, where they're going. They'll copy the Nebulous so they can bounce between two of them and shoot out a surprise Avada Kedavra. They'll probably run 1 to 2 stun spells to make sure their Avada Kedavra hits, which is super frustrating. Some of them use a Pipsky to heal themselves, basically to keep them on the board longer, because they're not really playing the same game as you. They're just trying to basically postpone long enough to get the Avada Kedavra shot off. You have the copy spell, so you can obviously play Avada Kedavra 2 times in a row, or you can use the T-Bow's Assault in order to clear ads, so that way, again, they live longer. Niffler to accomplish all these things faster with a nice cycle. And then obviously the T-Bow's Assault to clear the ads, and the Avada Kedavra, which is the win con. And then I would not be surprised if you saw Cassandra being one of the first things they play very often, just to kind of keep the swarms at bay while, you know, they start working towards their win con, which is killing you with Avada Kedavra. Ron maybe to clear up the board, and generally you'll see Hagrid at the end to increase their longevity, and you can also make really interesting plays with moving around on the board and the Avada Kedavra. So something like this is what you'll see Dobbies use. I just try and body block. I try and deal damage to them faster than they can set up, which is difficult. This is a very, very difficult deck to counter if the pilot is skillful. And so right now it might not seem like a big deal, but the longer the game is out and the better players become at this deck, the more and more problematic this is going to be. And there's not like a ton of counterplay. Like I said, you can just try and race them. You can try and block them. You can maybe try and broomstick, port key your way out of the way. I don't know. It's just a very, very hard archetype to beat. There have been players that have like non-leveled cards, Avada Kedavra, and they've gotten all the way to Magic Awakened in the Taiwan version. So it's basically a skill gap card. Really closes the gap between people that are paying and people that are not paying. If you really want to get good with a deck and you're free to play, Avada Kedavra would be a great way of investing your time and your resources, because your cards don't need to be crazy leveled to accomplish the goal. So that's the last one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and please leave a like, comment, subscribe. I'm almost at 3K subs, which is crazy because when the game came out I was at like 1.3. So I really appreciate it. I did just apply for the ambassador program, so hopefully I become an official ambassador. Maybe they give us like leaks for new cards coming up or something. I don't really know what it entails, but that would be really cool. But anyway, I'll also be streaming at 6:30 tonight, like I do every night until I decide I can't take it anymore. And yeah, with all that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.